Welcome back, AI curious folk. Hope you all had a wonderful July 4th. Today, it's time for AI Ramblings Daily Podcast, episode 112. Let's get started. I am Michael Parekh, your human AI guide. Today's theme is AI chips, not as easy as it looks. From making the chips to financing the chips to making money around the chips. It's all very hard and getting harder, and that's what I wanted to go through via 3 stories that I want to cover, as usual, with my take for each and my overall take. First, an episode that showed why making AI semiconductors, whether it's the AI GPUs, the CPUs, the memory chips, all of it combined, etc., is extraordinarily hard. The case in point here is in SemiAnalysis, which is the big AI trade research firm, had a very detailed piece. I'll have it in the show notes for those interested. It literally walks through just a lot of the detail about the tick-tock roadmap that Nvidia and its founder CEO, Jensen Huang, has extraordinarily executed across now over 6 years of this AI wave, from its Ampere chips to Hopper to Blackwell last year to now Vera Rubin and the next iteration Feynman. For most of you, all of that is just gobbledygook, but these are essentially exponentially improving GPU chips that basically make the bulk of what is demanded for by the big tech companies around the world to build the AI data centers that are right now running at typically $150 billion per tech company. So we're talking about trillions of dollars. Goldman Sachs has an estimate basically saying it's at least 7 trillion by the end of the decade, including power. When we talk about the roadmap of these chips, and every at least a couple of times a year, Jensen walks through the roadmap at the GTC conferences, and I have detailed pieces describing this, etc. It looks like a very kind of smooth, okay, this is what they're going to do, it'll get done, etc. kind of a roadmap. But this stuff is hard in terms of you're assembling thousands, if not tens of thousands of components from dozens, if not hundreds of sources. And that's what NVIDIA basically puts together, not just the hardware, but the open source, a set of software around CUDA and other libraries, and tries to make it all work, not for one customer, but for dozens, if not hundreds of customers that all have variations in terms of how they want to use it for various aspects of AI, training them or running inference on them, large models, frontier models, what they need to do in terms of reinforcement learning, all the technical bits that need to be done need extraordinarily customized configurations of these chips. The task at hand here is the business of Vera Rubin, the Vera Rubin Ultra. There was a system component assembly of something called Kyber, which is now apparently being delayed because of a whole bunch of technical issues they're finding. And instead of out in 27, it'll be out in 28. Normally, that would be an important hiccup. But because of the overall demand curve for these chips running through the rest of the decade and the shortage of these chips, it's not necessarily a hiccup for NVIDIA's revenue growth, etc. But it is a huge operational hiccup in terms of how NVIDIA has to adjust for all these things in its supply chain all over the world. And then customers have to accommodate how they configure and reconfigure the data centers. Not important for regular mainstream users, but very important in terms of understanding how these things come together and are being deployed at scale. So I wanted to highlight that because it's not often we see these kinds of hiccups, but when they happen, they're notable. And it's an interesting example of semiconductors not being as easy to look as it looks on the surface to put it all together. The second event I want to talk about is basically Asian chip companies basically continue to raise mega dollars. I talked about this last week on one of the AI Rambling shows. Specifically, it's about SK Hynix raising lots of secondary dollars to fund together with Samsung and the Korean government. They announced multi-$100 billion investments in AI memory chip fabs for HBM, high bandwidth memory chips, as well as investments in data centers and the like. But there was updated news today. Again, source notes will be in the links, but it'll basically talks about SK Hynix basically positioned to raise about 28, probably a little bit more, $28 billion for just additional capital for them to accelerate capital investment through the booming cycle that is right now responsible for all the Ramageddon that I've talked about. The notion that basically most of the local computers, smartphones, and all manner of electric gadgets basically are seeing dramatic increases in memory prices, down from 5% of the bill of materials of these things to 40-50%. And these prices are going up 30-40-50% every 6 months or so. And there's a lot of shortage. So investments along these lines, capital raised for these things is important. And so far, it looks like the demand for these kinds of capital raises is ahead of supply. 2x or more. And so that is the interesting thing. I just wanted to note, we're going to see more of these things, not just from the memory companies, but almost everybody else. You saw Google raise over $80 billion a few weeks ago, not on the chip side, but of course, they're going to use some of the proceeds for their TPU chips, which of course the beneficiaries will be entities like Broadcom and TSMC and others. So this business of raising mega dollars for making more chips is a key piece of this theme of not as easy as it looks, and we're just seeing this stuff proceed in a tick-tock form. Third item I want to talk about is the FT had a detailed piece on looking at SoftBank's Masayoshi-san, who's been a veteran, obviously, through multiple tech waves. I've had opportunities to intersect with him, being in the room, as it were, with him in the early PC days and internet days. He, I helped Goldman take Yahoo public. He was the founder of the agreement to have a Yahoo Japan entity that basically carved out the role for the internet in Asia. And since then, he's obviously had huge ups and downs. Early investor in Alibaba, so hundreds of billions in profit. All of that basically came crashing down 90% at the dot-com bust in the early 2000s. And then he's had huge ups and downs, $100 billion swings with everything from the vision funds with Saudi Arabia, etc. But he has been obviously very aggressive in this AI tech wave for the last few years. Early investor in ARM, which is again a huge semiconductor company, basically makes the templates, that the software that companies like Apple and dozens of other companies use to make all the chips and the wafers that go in and the systems on a chip that go into their various products, whether it's in the data center or on gadgets. And SoftBank is an 90%, I think, owner of ARM. They're making huge commitments to companies like OpenAI, tens of billions of dollars, and a whole bunch of other things around the world. They just made a big data center commitment in Europe, lots of things going on in Asia. So truly a global investor. Again, the notion here is that, especially in semis, because of his investments in ARM holdings and so on, he's a big player in terms of this theme of AI chips, not as hard as it looks. He's made a number of additional investments around this, and also raising money and most importantly, investing in these things in a systematic format. So the overall take that I have is that all these three types of chip challenges, the making of them, the funding them, and then the investing around them is an ongoing task that has been true in almost every tech wave. It's exponentially more difficult in this one because of the scale and the zeros again involved. And for most of the participants in every one of these three stages I've talked about, it's really what I call a ready, fire, aim cycle, rather than the typical what we would all like is ready, aim, fire systematic thing. Everyone from Meta to Google to Microsoft, they are all investing ahead of the visibility for these markets, for the technical difficulties of making everything from the chips at the bottom end of the stack to the applications at the top end of the stack. And that is what is a remarkable thing that we see in almost every tech wave, from the PC to the internet to mobile to now AI and all the other tech waves in the middle. But this one is far more complex, where the innovation is just getting started. It's not going to be done in 2 or 3 years. It'll continue for 5, 6+ years in terms of how these things are built and finding the product market fit around that. And all of that constantly goes back to the hardware, because the software, whether it's at the language model level, large, medium, small, to the applications, continues to need to be super optimized to the hardware as the hardware is being made and made available at scale around the world at ever increasing pricing for now. So that's my overall take on this not as easy as it look theme for AI chips. So hopefully that is of interest. Gadget AI section today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the best good enough $400 65-inch mini LED dumb TV of 2026. Quite a mouthful. What am I talking about? In general, most of the investments that we're talking about in terms of AI are basically for smarter devices. We want smarter glasses. We want smarter smartphones with AI, with Siri, etc. We want smarter everything. But there's a price for that, that these products, because they're dependent on our use and our data, are basically reselling that data. So we are trading our trade in privacy in exchange for functionality for the free versions of these products, and increasingly even the ones that we pay for. And this has been true, obviously, for the last 25 years in terms of social media. The Google and Meta, earlier Facebook, basically clarified that we are the product. The billions of us who use everything from Instagram to Google, it's our usage of these services that is the product. Our privacy it's what's being traded. And Apple on one end has basically made a virtue out of that, basically saying we're going to prioritize trust and privacy above everything else. And so their products and services tend to be a little bit more secure on this. TVs, the ubiquitous thing around your house, is something we never think about as a privacy thing. But almost every TV in your home today is essentially watching you, has been for years. Every channel, everything you do has constantly been monitored by the manufacturer of the TV and then resold, which is why you've been able to buy these TVs, these huger, bigger and bigger screens for smaller and smaller dollars at your Costco or your Walmart, etc. In fact, Walmart bought one of the biggest manufacturers of these low-cost TVs called Vizio not too long ago, basically to continue this monetization directly at the Walmart level. And they have a product called the Vizio Mini LED $400 65-inch TV that was just reviewed by the senior TV analyst at The Verge. That's why I'm bringing up this topic. And there's a link, very detailed, very interesting, if you want to know more about what I'm talking about here, to read, because he walks through why this is one of the few TVs that you can really use as a dumb TV. You actually cannot go to a Best Buy or a Costco or a Walmart and buy a TV that does the minimal of monitoring, watching what you do, etc. There are lots of techniques to do it, but this one, because of a couple of features he found in terms of how this was set up by Walmart with the Vizio software, the operating system, you can do that. And it's very interesting for those of you who do want to take some control on this mechanism. Most of us won't. Most of us in technology over the last 2 decades have traded our privacy for the convenience and the relatively inexpensive versions of these products, hardware and software. But for those of you who care, the less than 1%, this is an interesting article. So I just wanted to highlight that. And there is a product that has some of the latest mini LED display technology, but makes it available at a $400 price and minimize the amount of monitoring that goes on and reporting back of your data, of your usage of your TV to all manner of people out on the internet. So that leads us to the question answer period of this top of this AI ramblings. The one question I thought would be appropriate given what we've just talked about is, what's my best strategy to minimize TV monitoring and tracking? I typically don't worry about too much as you do, as we all don't worry about it as much as we should. But one approach that I've taken is basically buy Apple TV streaming devices, basically for every TV, and make sure all my TVs don't turn on the default operating system that's provided by the manufacturer of the TV, because there's a ton of monitoring that's built into that the moment you turn it on and connect it to your Wi-Fi. So one mechanism to minimize that is actually use a streaming service like Apple TV. And if you use that through the HDMI connection as your turn on thing, and that's Apple's operating system, TV OS is your OS, then that will minimize some of the tracking and monitoring that goes on. And there's a lot of resources on the internet that basically helps you optimize that if you're interested. But that would be in contrast to what you would do with a Roku device, which just got bought by Fox for billions of dollars, or Google or Amazon's Fire TV streamers and all these $20, $30, $40 streaming devices versus Apple, which until a couple of weeks ago was about $100, $120. It just got increased in price to $200, which is unfortunate. Again, Ramageddon, but that is a mechanism that I wanted to highlight. The second question is, what's my most wished for feature in these TV gadgets and technologies? And the answer here is really a technology around the TV OS, whether it's from Apple or anybody else, that would address what I call the tyranny of choice. The reality is that we have an explosion of programming and just increasing silos in terms of this network and that network, that you can find this show, that movie, etc., free, paid for, etc. But there are no mechanisms. I mean, there are search engines, but there are no mechanisms to proactively find what you should watch, what you'd like to watch. And so far, it typically, for most people, it takes as much time to find what to watch as to watch it, at least even if, especially for half an hour shows. And that is something that potentially AI can play a big role. We've not started on that yet. It's barely begun. The solutions are not quite there, but that's what I'm looking forward to on the TV front, whether they're smart TVs or dumb TVs or anything in between. So hopefully that helps you, AI curious folk. I just wanted to also highlight today's AI Reset to Zero piece, which is about some of the parts analysis on Microsoft. Basically, there is a move afoot to recommend a spin-off by Microsoft of some of their resources to increase the value of their stock. It's a theme that I've talked about, no stock market analysis here, but or recommendations here, but analysis. I've talked a lot about the opportunities for spin-offs by big tech companies, Google in particular, and Microsoft is the one being talked about here, that there is an opportunity for this going forward, given how investors are leaning in up and down the tech stack. And Microsoft has some interesting opportunities and assets here. So you may want to take a look at that if you're interested in the subject. Tomorrow, of course, we will have ARD 113 and Reset to Zero 1140. I want to thank you all for joining us, AI Curious folk, and stay tuned.